we feel quite confident that the last part of her journey, she will be wrapped around with care.
You will follow, what they have requested.
Yeah.
Because it's a final act of love.
It is a big, scary topic to talk about. It's somewhat uncomfortable.
St Vincent's Care presents Navigating Aged Care, an original podcast series. Welcome to Episode 5 of St Vincent's Care's 5-part Navigating Aged Care series. I'm your host, Nicole Lessio, and in this, our final episode, we're tackling the tough topic of death and how preparing and supporting our loved ones and ourselves through their end-of-life care with compassion and dignity is crucial. We'll be joined by true experts in the field, the residents, their families, as well as aged care staff, geriatrician and a psychologist. Joining us first up are Sheridan and Brian. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Brian, this is a tough one, isn't it? We're talking about something that all of us try to avoid talking about, but it's inevitable, isn't it? We're all going to die. How do you navigate that kind of conversation with your mum, who's in aged care, talking about the kind of death that she wants to have?
I do agree with you. It's tough,
Mm.
but it is a conversation that I would recommend people have.
Mm-hmm.
And again, fortunate enough that Mum is quite open to talking about what she would like. And then we seized on that opportunity to really talk it through from the idea of no resuscitation, which she was a part of that conversation, through to, a funeral, burial, what sort of funeral you would like. Are there certain, prayers or whatever that you would like? And that was a good positive conversation.
Yeah.
And one that Mum was pleased to have, I
Right.
think, such that we could document it. And it also means that when the time comes, which it will, because Mum's nearly 103, and she's in that phase, although her health is good at the moment, but it's obvious it's going to happen, that we continue on as normal, but we know very much how it will happen. And that is a bit of a relief for the family in that it doesn't lead to a bit of internal disagreement among siblings, for instance, that it's all documented, it's quite clear. It was Mum's wishes.
Right.
And that is important, I think, as us as children of that, to go, yes, well, in your final stage, we are doing what you wanted.
Yeah, that's a really important thing to feel when you've done as much as you can and you've done exactly what someone wanted. But the conversation itself, Brian, how hard is it?
It is hard. You think about your own mortality and you think about your mum's the last parent alive, so that changes things. There's, for me, it's about there's a gap because it's somebody that I have talked to and they've been my counsellor and I've been their coach and that. So it will leave a gap, but I suppose I had to be pragmatic and try and hold back on those emotions and focus on, well, let's be prepared for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Sheridan? Have you had those kind of conversations with your mum?
Yeah, I have. And that's really well said too, by the way. I really
Thank you.
It's really good. Yeah, we have, because we had trial by fire with Dad. We didn't know so much stuff. And you don't know if you're making right decisions, wrong decisions. You have no idea. Especially when you're talking end of life decisions. You were talking about resuscitation and stuff. Didn't know his wishes. So you make a decision and you have to live with the guilt, the consequences of not knowing. So so since then, yes, those conversations have been had. They weren't probably particularly difficult for us because of the circumstances that led to having the conversation.
Yeah.
You now realise the necessity for having this conversation. For me, discussing mortality, my own, whatever, isn't particularly difficult because it's not something I'm fearful of, but I am aware that it is a difficult conversation for a lot of people. But yeah, we had the same, very similar to what you said. Ours was very, very similar, discussing, what Mum's wishes were. Not even just after her death, even in the lead up to, about end of life. And yes, having them document, massively important, documentation for sure. And yeah, so we've had them. yeah, it is emotional because, yeah, you're facing your own mortality as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't think I could really say anything better than what you did. It was really very well done.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're the next. It feels like you're the next in line, then, doesn't it, Brian?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
When you're having those conversations, doesn't
Yeah.
it?
Well, yes, and there's an emotional side to it, but there's also all that practicality of things like, is the will in place? Is it current? Who's going to be the executor?
Yep.
You do approach those, maybe not all in the one conversation,
Yeah.
but
Yep.
over time.
Yeah.
And it's,
Yep.
I think we go back to something that I know we will talk about is you can broach it by the fact of, have you thought about what you'd like, Mum?
Yeah.
And then that might lead into a conversation.
Yeah.
And had your mum thought about
Yes, she had. She's amazed me, and again about sort of how relationships evolve. She amazed me that I never thought she was a deep thinker, but she is.
Yeah.
And I've now I've learnt that, and I'm pleased I've learnt that. So we can talk about things now which are perhaps a little bit more involved.
Yeah.
Not just about death, sorry.
No,
Yeah,
of
yeah.
course.
But, current
Absolutely.
affairs or opinions or things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that then does, I think, deepen a relationship that you can then have amazing conversations about other things because you've
Yeah.
had the biggest one, I think,
Yeah.
you can have.
Yeah.
But it's not just about someone's funeral and death itself.
Yeah.
It's about their end of life
Yeah.
care, isn't
Yes.
it,
Yeah.
Sheridan?
Yes.
So those conversations with your mum,
Yeah.
really challenging to have, or
I think for us, probably not, no. I think had we not had the experience we had with Dad, yes, it would have been very challenging. But coming off the back of that, we all learnt so much from, if it's possible to take something good out of something bad, we did. And we were like, okay, we don't want to feel this way again. We don't want to be in this position again. So, okay, the only way to avoid that, to mitigate this entire problem, is to just go, okay, well, let's just be really frank about it. We kind of almost said it quite jokingly, really. Like, it was almost a very lighthearted for us, but that's probably more in keeping with my personality that, I often joke about things when I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You may have noticed that today. We had this lighthearted kind of conversation. You made a bit of jest about some of it because, like you did rightly say, it's inevitable. So there's no point really overthinking or stressing about it. That's from us. That may not work for everybody because everyone's different, but that did work for us.
Yeah. But your mum, I imagine, is someone who's experienced a lot of grief and loss in her life, Brian. So it's hardly a surprise to her, is it, that she will inevitably die?
No, and I'm sure, as you've just said, she's seen it happen sometimes in unexpected ways. And you learn from that about what you would like and how you would like. So maybe she was hoping that we would ask.
Yeah.
She might have been waiting for it.
Yes,
Yeah.
waiting for it.
Yeah.
But you mentioned something just in that conversation about, we know that that's sorted, but the actual end of life experience.
Yeah.
I feel very comfortable, as do my siblings, that where Mum is residing at the moment, that they have spoken about care through the entire cycle, and we feel quite confident that the last part of her journey, she will be wrapped around with care.
Yeah.
And it will be, hopefully, very peaceful. And that in itself is nice for us to understand.
Yeah. I understand that. Yeah,
It's really
definitely.
comforting, isn't it?
Yeah,
It is,
comforting was
it
the word
is.
I was looking for.
Yeah. Because we have our own fears about death. It's really hard to then not put those fears onto our parents, isn't it, Sheridan?
Yeah.
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 Did you find that with your mum, that you were putting a little bit of what you expected at the end of your life on the conversations you were having?
Yeah, a little, but I think I was putting probably more my expectations of what I think she should have.
Right.
Because our viewpoints are different. And I had to sort of sit back and think, well, okay, that's not what I want, but that's what she wants, and that's okay. I shouldn't be imposing my viewpoints or my feelings onto her. And that was sort of, I think the most important thing is realizing that it's not actually, this conversation is not actually about me in that vein.
Yes.
And because it is very hard not to put your own 2 cents worth in,
Yeah.
especially when you're as opinionated as me. Yeah.
Well, and you've got your own ideas, so
Of
you want to
course.
share those as well.
Of course. Yeah.
Brian, you mentioned before about the family
Mm.
all having the conversation together. How important has that been for you as a family to be able to have those together?
Found it necessary.
Mm.
And it's part of that engagement of everybody being on the same page, I believe is very important. Because when you are faced with the actual passing, there's so much that's going through your mind with grief and the practicalities associated with it of clearing the room, preparing the funeral.
Yes.
That to have a bit of a roadmap and have the family working towards that in amongst their grief, I think it again brings comfort that you are, again, coming back to you are doing what's all been agreed, so let's just move with it.
Yeah, do
and
the
we'll
next
all
right
get
thing.
through it together.
Yep.
But we'll get through it in a way that we know it's the right legacy.
Yeah.
Did you have difficulty, though, with any conflicts between your siblings, or was it all predicated on what Mum wanted?
You have to come back to that.
Yes.
But yes,
Yeah.
Individuals all have different opinions,
Mhm.
but we just had to keep coming back to, well, this is what Mum wants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
agreed.
So
yeah.
we're not putting any filters on it.
Mhm.
This is how she would like it.
Yeah.
But like you,
Yeah.
I sort of expressed, well, what about
Yeah.
this and what about this?
Yeah.
No, I want this and I want that.
Mhm.
So again,
Mhm.
you can't help bringing your own preconceptions to it and what you might want.
Yeah.
But again, you talk it through and you listen.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah.
Mm.
That's a big key, isn't it?
Yeah, massively. Yeah.
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 That listening piece.
Yeah, of course it is.
Mm.
And it's like I said before, it's about remembering. It's not actually about you.
Mm.
Like it is, of course, but it's really not. You have to be mindful that this is the person's wishes, their wishes, not yours.
Yeah.
And and it may not, align with your chosen faith or your thoughts or your feelings or whatever, but if you actually have any respect for that person, then you will follow, what they have requested.
Yeah.
Because it's a final act of love. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good point.
That's
Yeah.
a really
It
good
is.
way of expressing it.
Yeah.
That it is that final act of love that
It
you can
is.
show to the person that
Yeah.
you love, that I will respect your
Yeah.
wishes
Yes.
and do as you've asked us to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't make it easy though, does it?
No.
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 But I think it's easier to have the conversation while the person is well
Mm.
than wait until they're literally on their deathbed
Yeah.
and you're actually, and they might be just cognizant enough that you can have a conversation and say, oh, okay, so while you're on life support, what sort of end of life things are you like? And no, that's not the right time to have that conversation
That's
ever.
not. Yeah.
No, you're better off having the conversation in a non-stressful situation.
Mm.
If you wait until there's a stressful moment, then
Yeah.
you're not going to make clear decisions.
Yeah, you're adding the stress to the emotional weight that
Yeah,
you're already
yeah.
carrying.
Yeah.
I've always thought that funerals and the busy work of what happens after someone dies is
Yeah.
actually part of us keeping busy while we're trying to process our
Yeah.
own grief. But I think that if we do it in a way that is respecting that person's wishes,
Yeah.
then we can do that in a loving expression, just as
Yeah.
you said.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
really like that, Sheridan.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense to
Yeah.
me. I'm taking notes in my head of all the things that I need to.
If you forget, call me.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Everyone's going to call you now, Sheridan. We're going to listen to you and find out all the things we need to do. Is there anything that you haven't asked Mum at end of life time, Brian, that you're thinking, I'm running out of time, I need to get this done?
That's a good
That's
question.
that's why I was like, ooh, that's a good question.
And I had thought, prior to you asking that, we
Yeah.
have probably covered everything off.
Yeah.
But you've got me thinking now,
Mm.
are there... I don't think there is, but I do think that we will revisit it.
Mm.
Not to change it,
Mm.
but maybe just at a point to reconfirm
Yeah.
that this is
Yep.
still what mum is thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because your mum moved into aged care a decade ago, didn't she?
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So things
Yes.
can change in that time too.
Well,
Yeah.
they can about how she's thinking and how she's feeling. Yes,
Mm.
that's right. So I think that's probably
Yeah.
a good thing to do.
Mm.
You know what? The other reason I think it's important to have that conversation is, you know, we do have our own lives, and you know, I want to feel that if I'm away, should mum pass away, and I'm overseas or
Yes.
something, that
Yep.
at least I know that things can be progressed that I am aware of, I'm
Mhm.
happy with,
Mm.
and that is another level of comfort.
Mm.
And that could happen.
That's actually a good point. I'd never thought of that. So thank you for that thought.
Mm.
Have to go and mull. That's never occurred to me. That's
Yeah.
actually a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't always happen on the timeline that we expect it to.
No.
Very true.
It'd be
Very
super-
rarely, in
yeah.
fact.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think having the conversation is the biggest takeaway from
Yeah, of
this
course.
chat that we've had
Mm.
today. Your advice for anyone who's in that position, Sheridan, what would
Yeah.
you tell them?
About having the discussion. I think as we've touched on already throughout most of our chats is the need for absolute honesty and no judgment. So you have to approach everything with empathy and kindness and just listen, essentially.
Mm.
Because again, like you were saying, it's not about what you want, it's about having a collective idea so that everybody, you know, in this what is a very challenging and difficult situation, you can mitigate as much pain as possible.
Yeah.
And that comes down to planning, wills, like making sure everything's all across the line, even about knowing where your bank accounts, where's money, where's this, where's knowing these things, you know, really, really important.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just about being really open and honest and trusting your family and the people around you to have this conversation with. Yeah.
Your advice, Brian?
I couldn't have said anything. I agree. Have the conversation.
Yeah.
However you want to approach it and you feel
Yeah.
comfortable, but have it.
Yeah.
It brings peace of mind
It does,
to
yeah.
both parties.
Yeah.
And I agree with everything you said. I think that sums it up
Yeah.
beautifully.
And I don't think you necessarily need to wait till you get to a certain age.
No.
My takeaway from it was that I went, well, I need to have this conversation with my kids now.
Yes.
I need to actually do this now. Like, I don't want to wait until I'm, 70 or because I don't actually know what my life has in store.
No, you don't.
And so, yeah, I've
true.
actually learnt from my experience and gone, well, I'm going to, again, mitigate as much pain as I possibly can on my children. And the only way to do that is to do this.
Yeah.
And I've had it with my children.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So I've normalised it for them now as well. Moving forward, hopefully they can then have this conversation with their partners or their whatever going forward.
You're modelling the behaviour you want to see. I love that.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
most
Yeah.
definitely.
I think we all need to learn that lesson. So I
Yes.
really appreciate Brian and Sheridan, you sharing those lessons with us, because I think the more that we can have those conversations, the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sheridan. Thank you so much, Brian. We're going to bring on our experts next to talk about this really sensitive topic. Hey, while we're in a short break, I wanted to let you know about the video series that inspired the podcast you're listening to, Season 2 of Celebrating You. Celebrating You is a mini-series focused on aged care. I've watched the videos and they are really beautiful portrayals of what it's like for families entering into aged care. They will hit you in the heart. Season 2 of Celebrating You is available to watch for free on the St Vincent's Care website. Just Google St Vincent's Celebrating You. All right, now back to the episode. Welcome again to Mark and Zoe and Richard. Thank you so much for joining us for this ridiculously important conversation starter that we need to have, that we're all afraid to have. We're not getting any younger, are we, Mark? We're all getting older.
Why are you looking at me?
But we're not. We're not going to get any younger whether we're in aged care or whether we're not in aged care. We're not aging because we're in aged care. We're just aging, right?
Correct.
So we all need to have these conversations, don't we?
I totally agree with you. That they're completely necessary because no one can avoid it. Getting older and eventually we are going to die. It's part of the living process.
Yeah. How do families balance their desire to do as much and get as much life out of their loved one as they possibly can with the idea that actually we're getting to that point now that they are going to die and we need to have these conversations about what it means? How do they balance that, do you think?
That's a tough one, but I truly believe the conversation has to centre about the person's quality of life. And having conversations early, I think Richard alluded to that earlier, that to have a good death, I think you have to plan those things as well and have these conversations. And when we know what the person wants, that will be the compass for every decision that's made, that will respect the person's wishes at the end of their life.
Zoe, why are we so afraid to have these conversations about death?
Well, death is so final. I think for a lot of people, it is kind of the ultimate end to this life that we have on earth. And, I guess one of the things to acknowledge about death is that there are a multitude of different, beliefs and value systems and cultural kind of practices around death, and that different cultures will perceive it and respond to it and approach it in different ways. But I think in general, it is a big, scary topic to talk about. It's somewhat uncomfortable.
How do we make it easier?
So I think acknowledging it early can be helpful if that is part of your culture and that's part of your approach to things. I think that kind of starting a conversation in maybe a bit more of a light-hearted way might be more approachable rather than kind of putting this big heavy thing on the table. And really just kind of checking in with the person about, hey, look, what do you want to talk about here? What would you like to happen?
Yeah. Just starting those little bits of conversation to try and bring it into our everyday, isn't it?
Yeah. And often my observation has been is that we're far more scared about talking about it than the person we're talking to. And in a lot of cases, say we're talking to a parent or a grandparent about it, they're much more accustomed to it already. They've experienced bereavement, they've experienced the loss of friends, they've experienced the loss of their own parents. They know a lot more about it than we do. So in actual fact, we can look to them for guidance a bit.
Yeah, Richard, it's not a surprise, is it, that we die?
No. Well, sometimes it can be. So sometimes there can be sudden death that occurs when it's not at all expected, and that always comes as a big shock. But more often in older people who have started to accumulate illnesses over a period of time, there is a degree of predictability about things, and allows that time for people to be able to express the view to the extent that they're comfortable about what their preferences might be. I always think there's sort of two parts to it. One is ensuring you've got the formal parts right, so the decision makers that you might need if you're no longer able to express your own preferences in place. And then there's all this informal stuff we're talking about too, where over a coffee or over a whatever it might be at the footy, watching a movie, you're having that discussion about the things that are important to you when that time comes. I think you're absolutely right, Zoe. Often the older person themselves has juggled this concept of mortality much more than perhaps we have done as their children. As you said, they've had relatives, friends, others get towards the end of their life and pass away. So they're much more open often to discussing things than you might imagine, and actually have a really well-formed view that if you invite, you'll get.
Is that your experience, Mark? Running an aged care facility, lots of people would be experiencing death in that facility. Is that your experience, that they're very au fait with it?
But what's always really resonated, I think that she's spot on about the older person being more comfortable with death, and sometimes maybe they are trying to protect their families by not encouraging these conversations. But I think this is where families have a duty to bring these subjects up to, and they'll probably discover, as Zoe said, that they feel quite comfortable and at peace with the journey.
Yeah. The process itself, though, when people are palliating, you've got experience with that. You've got experience with that, Zoe. You've got experience with that, Richard. But the person is only doing it for the first time. They might be really scared about what death means and what it looks like. How do you, as the aged care facility, help make sure that they have a better experience with their loved one?
I truly believe it's about planning. Even in death, I think you need to plan. So if you want to have a good death, you have to have plans in place which articulate about what you want at the end stage of your life. And that will relate to how much pain management you want, who you want around you, who we notify and bring in. I think it's critical that we get a full picture of what the person is wanting at the end of their life.
That's a really critical point, isn't it, Zoe, that we get that full picture?
Absolutely. It really reminds me of one of the sentiments that I've heard coming up again and again in palliative care, which is a good death is the kind of death that a person wanted. It can be so many different things, but as long as it's kind of what the person had wanted, the clinicians, the family, the community around them feel more peaceful with that.
And that's what we're aiming for, isn't it, Richard? We're aiming for that peace after that person passes away. Is there such a thing as a good death?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. That's the thing that sticks with you. And sometimes I was thinking as you were talking then, as the child of someone who might be approaching death, you have a whole range of different emotions yourself that you might almost push onto them. So you might fear losing them more than they may fear dying themselves. And you're also the one, as you said, who will carry the experience of that person's death into the future. So I've seen situations where that's been managed particularly well, and other situations where it's been managed more poorly. And the family in that situation can often have lingering with them these feelings that person's needs weren't met in the way that they would have liked, and that can really cut quite deeply.
Yeah, that emotional weight is a huge one, isn't it?
Can I just add to that? I think you asked, is there a good death? I do believe there is a good death. And in my experience, when there hasn't been a good death, is typically because there is conflict and people not all on the same page. That they have 3 or 4 children, they haven't talked, and they all haven't been involved. And that's where it's critical again, going back, planning and involving people so everyone's on the same page, and also singing from the same song sheet as well.
How do we plan that, Zoe, with our families? How do we have that conversation?
Well, yes, you do have to have a conversation. You can't avoid that part of it. And I think, again, it's a kind of approaching it with a sense of curiosity, a sense of openness, a sense of, hey, look, I think this would be important to talk about. Can you help us understand what you would want? Yeah.
We don't know what we're actually getting into, do we? Richard, what actually happens if I'm in the room with my parent or loved one and they pass away? What am I going to see? What am I going to hear so that it might demystify it for me?
It's such an important question. And I often think people are reluctant to ask it. And we as clinicians are often afraid to say. But actually being with someone as they're dying can be really confronting if you don't know what to expect. There are a whole range of different ways that it happens, but it's not always like in the movies where someone just closes their eyes and drifts off to sleep. Hopefully, and most of the time it can be done, someone can die without any distress whatsoever. But often there are changes in the body, in the breathing pattern. It can become less frequent, the breathing can become more laboured. There can be noisy breathing because secretions can sometimes form and not be able to be so easily cleared by the person as they become less conscious. And so all those things are really important for facility staff to talk with families about so they know what to expect. There can be really long pauses between breathing too, and that can be really confronting. So the more those conversations sensitively can be had so that people know the extent to which they're comfortable with what might happen, the better, I think. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Mark, is that something that you need to be doing with families? Are you doing that as their family member is palliating?
Absolutely. And can I just say, in most instances, I think Richard's spot on, but in most instances in residential care, it is quite a calm process because it's planned and we have the right support, the right medications. And it is I think, generally a very peaceful process. Yes, we do have the lead up and sometimes the breathing, but overall, in residential care, hospitals may be a little different, but we are quite, I suppose, experienced in managing this, and people have very peaceful deaths.
Yeah. kind of what we all hope for, isn't it, Zoe?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about the family in those situations? You're sitting there with your family member, they've died.
Mm.
What happens to our emotions when we're part of that process?
Yeah. Obviously, it can be a very confronting experience to be in the room as a
Mm.
person dies or thereabouts. And so many different kind of responses can follow. One of the things that they say about grief, there used to be this kind of idea that there were these predictable stages that people would move through.
Yeah.
And that's largely been disproven by the research, which shows that actually grief is highly, highly variable. And so any number of different reactions might ensue from, heart-wrenching grief and sorrow to relief and peace and just a sense of, thank goodness, it's kind of they're finally resting. It can be scary. It can be sad. It can invoke anger depending on the circumstances of the death. A whole number of different things.
Yeah. How do we hold ourselves during that time? What advice can you give us to make that process slightly less challenging?
I think you need to look after yourself, and you need to hopefully know yourself well enough to know what you need. So for some people, it will be helpful for them to be present, to be there for the person and totally immersed in that experience so they don't miss anything. For other people, they may need to step out, and that's okay too. So it's really important that a person is just aware of themselves and what they need to do to take care of themselves.
Yeah.
And not forgetting that you're never alone. So even if you don't have family, there are staff that will have gone through this process. And really in that residential aged care, we develop deep relationships with people we care for. So the staff that will be there to support not only the resident, but their family as well. And we have a whole bunch of team of people that, will only be too happy to step in. And so acknowledging that you too can reach out and it's okay. It's okay.
It's a hard thing to acknowledge, isn't it? That we feel like we have to be there, or we feel like we have to do a certain thing, that it has to be the right thing.
Absolutely. And I think that you hit the nail on the head. I would say Anglo culture sometimes can be a little bit stoic about emotions. Just, you are human. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to be angry, and it's okay to lean on someone when you need them.
Yeah. All of those emotions are absolutely correct at the time that they're happening, aren't they, Zoe?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important just to recognise there's no such thing as a false emotion or a bad emotion or a wrong emotion. It's what you feel is what you feel.
What do you get out of your role, Richard, in helping people have those kind of deaths?
I think, I often say at work, in exactly the same way as our role as medical people or as providers of care in health and aged care, is to give people a good life and make their quality of life and sometimes their quantity of life as much as good as it can be. So too, we get enormous satisfaction from being able to support people to have the kind of good death that Mark talked about before, where their needs are met, where they are completely comfortable, where they have the people around them or not around them that they want to have at that particular time. It might be music, it might be a conversation, it might be something that they really want to drink. I had a guy recently who hadn't had a can of Coke for a million years, and all he wanted was a can of Coke in the last few days of his life, and his family were able to bring that in for him. So it's often those really little things that if we listen to and attend to, we can help patients and families, residents in the case of people living in residential aged care facilities, have access to, that allows that to happen. And it gives us enormous satisfaction, absolutely.
It's quite a privilege, isn't it, Mark?
Absolutely. It absolutely is a privilege to help people when they pass away and making it comfortable and honouring their lives and supporting their families at the end.
Yeah, because they've had a whole lot of life and death is just another part of that life, isn't it, Zoe?
Yeah, absolutely. And it means as I said, it means different things to different people. For some people, it will be a transition to what comes after. For some people, it will just be the conclusion of the existence that they know. So it's just really appreciating what it means to them and supporting both the person who is passing away and the people around the person in processing it.
What happens when someone hasn't had the conversation, Mark? How hard is it for the person who is palliating at the end of their life? How hard is it for the families?
I believe it's a lot harder because you're not on the same page. It makes it that much more difficult. I think there's an old saying that goes along, failure to plan is planning to fail. I'm not saying it's a fail, but it makes it that much more difficult to get the death that a person deserves. And the process is harder, not only in the person dying, and I truly believe sometimes they may not be unconscious, but they can perceive the anxieties that the families are experiencing. So it's critical that you have these hard conversations earlier on, and you can start the conversations lightly, like Zoe said, but you need to have these conversations.
So we need to put on our big person pants and go for it, Zoe?
We do. Yeah, we do. And if I can share a personal story, I had a conversation with this. I had this conversation with my dad before he died some years ago. And he had a fantastic attitude towards it. He could find ways of laughing at anything. And so we had this great conversation, and he let me know exactly what he wanted. And it just meant that after he passed away, we could do exactly what he wanted and know exactly that was what he wanted, and just feel so kind of reassured and endorsed in our approach.
Yeah, it's really comforting, isn't it?
It really is. It really is.
Because otherwise you're guessing and you go, oh dear, I hope I haven't done the wrong thing. And that can lead to a lot more feelings of guilt and all those things that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
That relief part that we were talking about before, I wanted to touch on that because sometimes the person that we've loved is a different person that we experienced beforehand. They might have cognitive issues. They might be completely different personality-wise because of that. How often does that relief piece come into it, Richard?
It can be a really common emotion, I think. I think that particularly if a person has had illnesses that have caused them distress, that sense that they're no longer suffering can be a really heightened afterwards. That sense of relief that whether they've been troubled by cognitive impairment that's made them less oriented and less settled within themselves, or whether they've had physical pain that, or breathing difficulties, whatever it might be that was causing them distress before they died, that sense of relief afterwards that's no longer a struggle for them can be really, really significant. And a real help, I think, for people to feel that the person is now in a better place, whatever that place is. It's just a place where there's not still that suffering that they may have had. And then even where there hasn't been symptoms of distress leading up to someone's death, if the death has been a good, peaceful one where the needs have been met as we've described, that sense that that sense of satisfaction, I suppose, that the family and clinicians have been looking after the person, have been able to provide that death that allows the people to have those needs met, it can be really relieving and reassuring as well.
Yeah, but it all starts from a conversation, doesn't it, guys?
Totally.
So we need to make that happen. Priority, I think. I want to thank all three of you for joining us today on this amazing journey that we've had. We've gone through a lot of different things that we're talking about, and I'm really grateful for your honesty and openness. And I know that people listening are going to be going, I really need to have that conversation. That's what the whole point of this is, isn't it? So thank you so much to Dr. Richard, to Zoe, and to Mark.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We could do a whole series on grief and how we can support ourselves through it. But the biggest takeaway is to be kind to ourselves. Be gentle, because grief is a beast. But we can make it slightly less beastly by having some of these conversations beforehand. That was the last episode in our Navigating Aged Care series. We hope it's been a source of some valuable insights and support for you. I know I've learned a lot and feel a lot more prepared to have some really honest and open conversations with my own parents. I hope you feel more prepared too. I want to thank Sheridan, Grace, Brian, Dr. Richard, Mark and Zoe for joining us for this episode and for the entire series. Thanks also for you for joining in. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to hit the follow button and share it with your friends and family. Don't forget to visit our website, www.svcs.org.au, to watch the videos from our latest campaign, which inspired this podcast series. You can also stay connected with us on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn by searching St. Vincent's Care. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, leaving a rating or review would mean the world to us. It really helps other people find the content. We hope this series will serve as a useful guide for you and your family in navigating your loved one's own aged care journey. Take care and bye for now.